All right, I think we can begin now. So I see a lot of you on Facebook Live and Zoom from wherever you're tuning in. Hello to every one of you guys. Today we'll be focusing on lower elementary math learning, and I am your host, Zubin. Of course, some of you guys already know me from the previous webinars, but for those who don't, I've graduated from UCLA and I've been at Think Academy as a grade 3 specialist, especially focusing in Math Kangaroo with deep expertise in the test and as well as the ICSE board. That has been my history and looking forward to sharing our findings. So number one thing is the foundation for grade 1 to 2 students, right? We need a good foundation for mathematics, and we'll be covering that today. The most common problems that grade 1 to 2 students face is, well, the calculation fundamentals are limited to basic counting and a lack of multiplications. What you need to know for Math Kangaroo is that you need knowledge of all the tables from 1 all the way through 9, but very quickly too. So what I see with a lot of the students, especially grade 1 students, is their counting is limited to, say, finger counting or associating with physical objects, and that needs to be boosted up a little bit. We will get to that later. The second most important problem is the math reading skills that create errors in the more informative questions, especially the ones that involve math jargon. So Jimmy has 2 less and 5 more and 6 times the apples that Audrey has. These sort of things, just as a random example, how to translate that into operations is where the grade 1 students, especially in some grade 2 students, struggle when facing word problems. And number 3 is that the scope of geometry is limited to just known figures. So a lot of the parents prep based on okay, these are the properties of a rectangle, square, whatever it is. These are all known figures, and they don't necessarily focus on covering spatial sense. So how do we look at the depth of an object? How do we imagine figures that are not necessarily in front of us, right? And overall, there is a low priority on the habits such as good note-taking. We've been having a workshop for quite some time now, and what we see as the most common issue, I would say, is the low priority given to good habits such as note-taking, writing down your steps. These are fundamental for grade 1 and 2, because if these are not habits that are developed early, it certainly becomes a very much hard, it's significantly harder to do these things in grade 3 and grade 4. I know, since I teach all of these the students in grade 3 and 4 as well as 1 to 2, and I see that for the ones who have developed it early, they seem to be more comfortable with a good structured thinking process, right? Because good note-taking is not just to be clean, it's also to be organized in terms of the way you break down your thoughts, and that is why it is important. So we see that in the workshop, and I would like to emphasize on that in general. Now, the 3 most important modules are calculation, geometry, and word problems, right? For those of you who were at the info session on the previous one, for the general info session on Zoom as well as Facebook Live, you saw that level 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, the most broadly covered topics are these 3, right? They vary based on year to year, but most of the questions do come from here, which is why we will be taking a dive into those 3 important modules. So let's start off with calculation. Calculation serves as the foundation to all math modules, right? This is the most important one because if you don't have a good base in terms of actually calculating operations, yes, you might understand the logic behind a complex geometry question. Yes, you can break down your word problems, but what good does that all do if the final answer is wrong, or the way you go through it is completely erroneous? There's a lot of improvement to be done, especially with the workshop students in the calculation aspect. The way we see the most common problems is that, and the way you can assess it with your students, with your children, is, are they counting with their fingers, right? If you see that when they're actually counting, they are using their fingers or using a physical object, then that is the first step. That is the base that you need to improve on, because that has to be improved for MK 1 to 2. Are they calculating slowly? And are they always making careless mistakes? Those are the most common problems. So here we have a step-by-step breakdown on how you can improve your calculation. First, as I've been alluding to previously, is counting with items. This is the first stage of calculation that students are in. There's 4 different stages we see broadly. If you're at the first stage, it's usually through your fingers or some sort of physical objects that slow you down and end up making silly mistakes, is counting with items, right? This shows that this needs to be improved if you are at this phase. How you could do that is through interesting number puzzles and these sort of things. Try to put the students in a situation where they are counting using methods more than just, okay, using your fingers or something like that. They need to have different methods to puzzle through puzzles through which they can start counting in their head mentally, right? Now, the step 2, the second level of calculation skills we see, is where you can do a good level of mental maths, but there are a lot of silly mistakes being made. So this is an important phase, because for calculation, if you are in this phase, if the student is making silly mistakes but can do mental math, you need to emphasize on effective practice. A lot of the parents ask me saying, yeah, we did the worksheet, but the time was a huge issue, right? And for parents in this, which the submissions are, say, you're still making a silly mistake, and especially in calculation, you need to start focusing on just the accuracy. The speed is off, of course, that's important for a test, but the accuracy is significantly more important, because yes, we are preparing for a test, but we're also preparing for general math foundations, right? We're at grade 1 to 2. If the accuracy is not right, then it's pretty much game over. So that needs to be the focus. Daily practice, effective practice through accuracy. We have a lot of resources for that as well. There's this Thinkulator book with Think Academy that is readily available for this sort of practice. For 1 to 2 level questions. It covers all the Math Kangaroo questions from past previous papers. Now that is step 2. That is how you effectively practice focusing on accuracy. The level 3 is where you are curbing down your silly mistakes, and now we can focus on speed. How we are going to do that is to try and have a targeted plan for each student, right? You need to have a fixed time in the beginning, and then slowly, and I'm not saying that you have to completely throw them out of their comfort zone, but slowly reduce the time taken for each sitting, right? A little bit by a little bit, just like you do reps, just a few less minutes every time so that the students are comfortable with the change. Number 2, most important part in speed. Specific to the test, I always tell parents is each student has a different strength. So play to your strengths and weaknesses. If you're practicing daily, you should maintain a good log of questions that the students got wrong and what category did they belong to. So if the students are good at geometry, then regardless of it being a 3-point, 4-point, or 5-point questions, you can tell them that, hey, you can try to speed it up over here. If they are weaker in, say, word problems, then even if it's a 3-point questions, which are supposed to be easy, you can let them know that, hey, through our history, we have seen, that we make some silly mistakes here. So it's okay to take more time, even though it's a 3-point question. So the speed calculation is not just speed, but it has to be a targeted plan based on your strengths and weaknesses. And also it needs to be gradual. You can't just say, okay, today we're doing the worksheet in 10 minutes, tomorrow 5 minutes, and then let's see how fast you can do. It needs to be gradual. So that's your 3rd level of calculation. And the 4th level, which is where we hope the students are by the end of this 3-month prep period, is to do smart calculation, right? So you're already doing it at a moderate pace, but how do we optimize for an additional, say, 3 to 5 seconds per question that you can shave off, which, although it sounds quite less, will be very valuable when you have it over a course of 25 questions, right? We optimize it using the different tricks. Students are not really used to using these tricks, even though they might know how to do it or they might understand it, because they're not practicing with it. What do I mean by these smart calculation tricks? For example, a good friend pair and a good enemy pair. These are fun things that grade 1 to 2 students are learning, in that if you have numbers, are you just blindly solving them from left to right? Okay, I see numbers. Okay, I'm good with it. I'm fast. Let's start solving. No, that cannot be the way you're going about it. You have to look at numbers as a puzzle, right? I see, for example, I have in question number 4, 241, 85, and 15. You need to look at numbers that match up well with each other, right? Good friend pairs are those that say add up to 100 or add up to a 10, any number that ends in 0, because numbers with zeros are easier to deal with. So you need to break down the numbers in front of you so that you have easier numbers, right? You can't just off to the races, let's start solving. Good enemy pairs, similarly, you subtract numbers that give you numbers ending with 0. These are some of the many different tricks that you can try and apply, but only when you are at that 4th skill level, right? When you are at that 4th echelon of calculation ability, that's when you can start applying these fast calculation tricks. So be realistic about their level, right? I see a lot of the parents are focused on ranking, and I want to get the best rank possible, and that is important, sure. It's good to have that sort of diligence. It serves them well long term, but at grade 1 to 2 level, the accuracy is more important, and having a passion for the subject is more important, right? These fundamental learning habits need to be encouraged more than let's get the best rank at this stage. So focus on writing down your steps and set specific goals that are attainable for the student. If you are at 72, you can't just say, oh, I want to get 95 on the next test. Make it so that it's okay. Let's try to avoid the mistakes that we did last time, right? Try to get to 80, avoid the silly mistakes, these sort of things. Now, you need to try and encourage, and we do as well, a little bit of passion for the questions. That's why Math Kangaroo is so good, because it does give the opportunity to do that. The questions itself are very, very unique. They're based on logic. They have number puzzles, like you can see. So even in your practice, do the same thing, right? You don't always have to practice using numbers and calculate numbers. You can have interesting puzzles, games, Sudoku, poke, all of these games, for example, the card games that you can do for calculation, try to switch it up. Use cards, use puzzles. These sort of things will have a level of passion that is important for a grade 1 to 2 student. If they're not interested, they won't push themselves to try and get better. Now let's get on to the word problems, which is very important, right? This is not just important for testing, but it is the #1 way you're going to channel your cognitive development and logic skills. The 3 main problems that we see is weak comprehension. And by that, I don't mean your English skills. I mean your math reading. If you have 4 lines, are you just reading them, or are you close reading them? Are you making mental tick boxes in your head? Okay, this is important. This is not that important. These 2 things are related. This is a condition that I have to look out for so I don't make a silly mistake. Ooh, this word is phrased in a way in which even if I get the right answer, it's not actually asking for that. So I might make a silly mistake over there. So effective reading, right? #2 is unable to translate phrases into operations. When you have mathematical phrases, kids tend to get confused on what operation to use for grade 1 to 2. So underline them and try to know, how do we translate this into a mathematical operation? And #3 is the anxiety. When you see a word problem, kids are not used to 4 or 5 lines of information, and they get testing nerves, right? You get a little afraid. You might feel defeated even before you solve the question. Oh, I can't do this. But you can, right? If with a little bit of habit and the correct way of going about it, which hopefully we do solve through the course of the workshop, we can do that. And in terms of the word problems, the first stage, as we covered in calculation, there's 4 stages. So is the case with word problems, is knowing the fundamental 4 operations. Now, this might sound basic. Yes, Zubin, of course, we need to know the operations, but you'd be surprised. Through the workshop, we're seeing that some kids are actually quite weak in, say, just basic division. This is not something you can ignore, right? You cannot go on to solving geometry or word problems if the operations are not strong enough. So if you think that is a problem, it is easy to identify because it's basic operations and it needs to be solved first. This is the fundamental, right? This needs to be done in a strong and efficient manner first. Then you go on to your good habits to enhance your comprehension skills. So you have to read the problem carefully, underline the facts that you see are key, draw a picture, right? Like, look at the picture on the right. This was 3 lines of information. The student made a nice line segment and try to break it down visually. Perfect. That's the best way to go about it, right? Make it interesting for yourself. Do it in a way that you are comfortable with doing. Write the number sentence for the problem. What do I mean by number sentence? Say, Jimmy has 5 less than, but 2 times more apples than Johnny. What does that mean? Underline that, put the operation on top of the question so you don't make that mistake when you're actually solving it. Solve the problem with some good steps and check your answer. Now, for word problems, I always recommend, if reading is the issue, then there is a targeted approach to fix this. There is plenty of reading comprehension exercises online for free. You don't have to pay anywhere. You just go online and look up reading comprehension for, I would recommend 3 to 4 kids. Now, this doesn't even have to be math per se, more of a argument, right? It'll give you a passage and it'll ask you questions within that passage, just like any other reading comprehension I'm sure you guys are aware of. But the good thing with this is that it'll get you in the habit of thinking critically, reading carefully. So reading comprehensions are actually really good, and they translate well to even when you're doing math. So these exercises are online. Make sure you do the timed ones so you have a timer on the passage. That's the best way to do it. You can adjust the timer and adjust it slowly based on the kid's comfort level. So do make sure you do that if reading is the problem. Now, word problems, the best way we can ace this module is to accumulate the different types of questions. This is very important. So for calculation, yes, effective practice is obviously and certainly the most important part. But for word problems, you'd be surprised. Yes, practice is important, but it has to be targeted towards specific categories of questions. This is huge. So in Math Kangaroo, we have had a plethora of experience dealing with students who have gone on to do really well. So we know where and how they ace those questions. And for word problems, it's through 7 specific categories. You have the calendar question, the space problem, the lineup problem, sum and differences, age, time, and page problem. 99% of the questions will come from these 7 categories. So if you just practice, it's not going to be that effective as opposed to say 10 questions from this, 10 from here. Make sure I cover all my bases, all of the categories. Even at the academy for the full-time students, we cover all the questions of all the previous past papers. For the parents in here that are part of the academy, a little bit for you as well. We will be covering all of those in the grade 2 syllabus. So even in the workshop for parents who are not part of the academy, that's okay. We will do that in the foundations camp workshop. We'll be covering the different categories so the kids have a good idea of what to expect when word problems do show up. Now, math is everywhere in life, right? Word problems and calculation, these are all well and good, but a way of practicing, and the best way of practicing, is really to just develop great interest within the material. You can do that by asking questions at home. It doesn't even have to be a worksheet. It could be as simple as going to the mall, and if you bought, say, a can of Coke, hey, I just bought this for $4. What would have I spent if I bought 8 of these and I gave 2 away and sold 3? Something like that. Something that is related to daily life. That is a good way of developing some sort of interest and consistent questioning of how do we translate mathematical phrases into operations. Number 2 is select an exercise book to practice. There's plenty of them for word problems. A good one is actually the Think Academy Math Explorer. This one covers all of the frequently tested 1 to 2 level word problem questions. I can tell you a little bit more about that as well if you need it. But for more challenging questions as well, I would recommend the Singapore Maths textbook for the 4 to 5 pointers. Do cover your basics first. If you're already doing well, then go on to the Singapore Math textbook. That's a good one as well. And besides that, you also have, say, you have Kumon, plenty of other resources that you can look up and do make use of them. Now let's go on to geometry. This is usually the most fun part of the paper. For most students, find this module the most fun, but are usually quite helpless when it comes to how do I get better at this module. So geometry, as I said before, is not just analyzing known shapes, but having the ability to imagine unknown figures, right? I am not going to cover basics of geometry and rectangles, that all you know, that's all important. But more importantly, I will be covering how do we focus on spatial sense. So why is geometry important? Because even though at a 1 to 2 level, it's easy when you get, especially in the US, when you get to high school, and even not just in the core curriculum, but even say in math competitions like AMC 8, which are really good to get into competitive admissions, geometry becomes the most hardest topic. So it is important to get a good foundation very early so that you can ace those questions in the future. They tend to be the most difficult. Now, like we did in calculation and word problems, there are also different steps on how to ace geometry. The first one is to obviously understand your basic shapes, and more importantly, observing them. These are going to be your inputs, right? You need to observe the shapes and understand what are the properties. Those are your inputs, right? Then you need to relate them to real life objects, because this is where Math Kangaroo comes in. You need to be able to see different shapes and know how do they relate to objects in daily lives. So if you're starting triangles, don't do it in a drab way. Try to relate to the pyramids, something like that. So when it comes up in the paper, kids are easy to apply their knowledge. Now, those inputs that I was just talking about, those are used in step 2, right? The analysis part, your observations, the pattern recognition, those are all your outputs, right? The more of the inputs you have in understanding basic shapes and their properties, the more of an effective analysis you can do when it comes to, say, exploring the different patterns in shapes, symmetry, numbers and shapes in terms of sequences, as you can see in the question in the middle, looking at different objects combined with other objects to see how do they make sense together. And finally, step 3 will be combining the numbers and shapes to use spatial imagination. For this, you need to be used to looking at 3-dimensional objects. I suggest getting a bunch of those, get little cubes, these sort of things, and try to understand what actually goes into making them. A quick exercise for this particular question, it's usually asked, and I'm talking about the rightmost question, it'll give you a figure like this and ask you how many cubes are there, right? Kids will count the ones that are in front of them and they'll forget about the base. So for example, well, what do I have in my hand? Nothing. I'm doing some magic. This is floating in the air. Well, that's impossible, right? Because everything has a base. There certainly has to be something underneath it for it to support it. So even for these cubes, why are they up in the air? There has to be a structure for it to support it, right? And even though we can't see it, there's a reason it's in the air. So these sort of ideas is a good way of having a depth of objects that you cannot see. And for geometry, there's plenty of resources, but this one is a little bit more difficult because you're not really practicing, but more in line with having a discussion that sort of incites creative thinking, right? More of imagination. So for those, you need like flat shapes. For flat shape questions, the tangram and word puzzles are really good. For solid shapes, you can always do it with blocks and Legos. These are good ways of understanding the depth of a figure. These are some good resources. So for calculation, practice, 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 but do it in an effective manner and understand which skill level is the student at. We showed you 4 of them. You need to assess which level does the child belong to and practice based on that skill level. For word problem, practice is good, but you need to accumulate all of the different kinds of questions. The 7 categories that I showed to you earlier, those need to be perfected because the questions will come from those. And geometry, you have to get a sense of it. You need to try and feel these objects yourself to actually develop a good imagination so you can solve those spatial sense questions. And overall, how do we gauge their potential? And most importantly, develop their interest. The most important habits, and I keep honing and hammering down on this, I know, but it is very important. It's as obvious as it sounds. I have seen around 60 students in the workshop till now, and this is something that is clearly lacking. All the silly mistakes come from the fact that there are no good habits. When you're solving, it needs to be clear and organized, spaced out. If you don't have a good scratch paper, you're going to end up jumbling the numbers and make a silly mistake in the end. Number 2, be focused. There are some keywords in the question where you're reading it And you need to be able to identify, which we will do with the kids, is is there a place in here that might be a potential pitfall? Is there a trap in here? There's a hidden trap in here that might make me have a silly mistake. So you need to be focused for that and resilient. You need to set a time limit. As I said in my last webinar, it is important to dedicate a specific room for your study habits, a specific place in your house, wherever it is. Your brain makes psychological connections with the surroundings around you. You know how you get into work and the first, say, 20 minutes, you're just doing it and you're not into it. But then there's a moment in time where you really get into the work and you are focused. That phase needs to come earlier. And that only happens when you are psychologically programmed to go, 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 because the surroundings around you are the ones that you are used to for this particular task. Number 3, self-check. You have to be responsible. Accuracy is the goal. Maintain a log of the questions that are wrong. Too often, parents, they see the questions are wrong. I give the advice. I say, okay, this is the solution. The child understands the solution. Game over. Okay, he understood where he went wrong. He understood the solution. Done. That is not how it is. If you get a question wrong, you really need to investigate what was the thought process that went into getting this wrong, right? You can't just say, oh, you got this wrong. Look, silly mistake again. Look, you're always making silly mistakes. This is an empty word, right? You're only going to solve it if you really question the thought process. Okay, where did we get it wrong? Okay, so you thought this. Okay, interesting. Then how should we have thought of it? The key questions need to be asked to the child to have a productive discussion so that you can actually investigate their thought process and try to channel them into thinking a certain way. Just saying, silly mistake made again. You got to focus. These are empty words. They get repetitive and kids just shrug it off if they hear it again and again. So these good learning habits are important. And I know I've honed on it again and again, but it's grade 1 to 2. If they're not built right now, it becomes problematic later. Interest is more important than talent. I always tell this to parents. I know you guys are worried about the score right now, but for grade 1 to 2, the first thing needs to be your interest, right? Kids need to have a passion for the subject. Math Kangaroo is not only good for developing logic, but also developing interest because they're unique questions. Find your child's advantage and play to it. Encourage them, guide them, have a sense of confidence that they can do it. And if they enjoy it, they naturally will try harder to improve at it. So there needs to be a focus on developing a passion for the subject. If it's not done right now, then it's just a chore. So always step out of your comfort zone gradually. Only do that once the interest has been solidified, right? It is more important for grade 1 to 2 than anything. And finally, the resources that you have to help you prep through this. There's a lot of them. As the workshop members know, and the ones on Facebook Live, I can explain that right now. As you know, we are conducting our Foundations Camp workshop next week onwards. So we have a specific plan for how we're going to approach Math Kangaroo. The good thing is we have time on our hands, right? This is going to be next year. So you need to do this right. I know some parents are saying, oh, they are, where are the 5-point questions and stuff? Well, of course, we're going to get to that. Those are important too. But first needs to be the foundation. If you're getting even 1 out of 5 questions wrong in the worksheets, these are not clear, right? If you shrug it off as a silly mistake, then that's an error because every mistake actually has some sort of key thought process that needs to be corrected, right? So we have our Foundations Camp coming next weekend. Lesson 1, which is the first week, is going to be covering shapes and patterns, where it'll be pattern recognitions and spatial sense, imagination, depth-related questions with different figures. Lesson 2 will be on numbers. So application of numbers, not in terms of pure calculation per se, but more of number puzzles, calculation tricks. How do we substitute different calculations to make it more effective? Lesson 3 will be on word problems. So as I alluded to before, there are 7 categories through which all the word problems come from. We'll be covering the lining up problem, sums and differences, and the age problem. These are very important for acing the word problem section. So for, as you guys already know, for the ones who are signing up individually, it is $75 per student. However, I recommend if you're in the workshop, unfortunately for the members on live, this will not apply to you. There it is 75 each. But if you're part of the workshop, you can go for the group option. So find 2 other team members. It doesn't have to be someone specific. You can just reach out to somebody in the WhatsApp group. It's a good resource for you to make some good connections with parents who are focused on the same things, and team up. If you go for the group option, it is $5 each, which is pretty affordable. We're trying to make it so that everyone can participate. And you can scan the QR code if you're interested in that. That is next weekend. I'll hope to see most of you guys over there. And besides that, there's also a lot of free resources, right? We have our WhatsApp group going on. And besides that, we have a bunch of other activities. We'll have webinars that are coming up for students. We will have also, this is a good one. If you actually go and sign up on the Think Academy website and just register, just make a profile, then if you put your email in there, then every month you will get a free monthly challenge workbook. So the one on the left is sort of what you will see when the workbook shows up every month. You click your grade, and then the one on the right is the questions that you face. Completely free. You just register and put your email in so you can receive these material. And of course, there's worksheets as well. The Think You Later Magic Book is good for grade 1 to 2 questions, especially the 3-point questions, pretty inexpensive. And it's also good for calculation. Think You Later books are good for some sort of daily calculations, daily worksheets. It's that one is there. I think for the workshop students, it is at a discount. And for if you're focusing on the Math Kangaroo questions, the Math Explorer is the better option, where you can look at the different questions. Also, besides Think Academy, there's also, you can look at workbooks such as Singapore Math, like I alluded to before, that are good for the 4-point and 5-point questions. And coming to an end, we will now take questions. Thank you guys so much for attending. If you don't have any questions, you can feel free to leave. But if you do, feel free to stay on and type in your question on Zoom. On Facebook, you can type it in on the live option, and I can answer them. We also have our teachers Star and Candy with us right now from grade 1 and 2, and they are very excelled in this department, so they can answer your questions as well. Where can we get the math workbooks from Think Academy? So you can reach out to me if you are interested in the workbooks, and I can give you the coupon code for the workbooks. The discounted prices are not there online, so I'll give you the code, and then you can use that if you want the workbooks. Where can we get math workbooks? Okay, and which was the one we should download for free? Yes, Shweta, I can send that to you. You can just go on the website, the Think Academy website. As long as you've signed up, registered, and created an account, the math workbook, the monthly math challenge workbook, will be emailed to you as a PDF. I have one from Facebook. Is the workshop already beginning? Yes, the workshop has already started, but that's no worries. I can always WhatsApp you the materials that you've missed till now, so I can send you all the resources that you have missed. It's just daily problem solving. We're going topic by topic, so each bank of questions, so the age problem, traveling, is solved on each day, and we're focusing on the 3-point questions first, and then we will gradually go on to the difficult ones. Oh yes, and for the that's the workshop, and also the foundations camp is starting next weekend, not this weekend. Yep, you can register for that over here. You can scan this QR code, and you can join in. I do recommend, if you're not on the WhatsApp group, however, since this is a Facebook member, I would presume you are not in the workshop. So do scan the WhatsApp QR code first and join the lobby, so that you can have that discounted group buy option, which is more affordable. Any other questions? I don't see any more. So I will conclude the presentation. Looking forward to seeing everyone on the Math Foundations camp. I see one more. Can we still register for the workshop? Yes, you can still register for the workshop. Yes, there is a lot of members who are looking for a group member. I would recommend, once you open your group, what some of the members are doing is posting their link into the chat. That's more helpful. So if you don't have a group yet, don't worry. I can always help you out and tell the members that, hey, this person has an open group. But I do recommend putting your link on that 1 to 2 level group first. Okay. All right. Well, I'll bring it to an end then. Thank you guys so much for attending. Hope you have a great weekend and a great Halloween.